I know some adults, if you only got one, you wouldn't raise your hands. So that's good.
That's true.
As you know, a couple weeks ago, we started this new series out of the Old Testament book of Ruth, and we took a break last week for Easter. But Ruth is the 8th book in the Old Testament, and you really don't hear a whole lot about it. You might be familiar with it, but you usually don't hear a whole lot about it. But there's a lot in there, and it's a very important book, and there's a reason why it was included in our Bible, as we will see here in just a bit. But the book of Ruth, it starts out sharing the story of a woman named Naomi. Naomi's married to Elimelech, and they are from Bethlehem. And as they're living, famine came and hit the land, and you know how that can really disrupt a lot of things. And so Elimelech moved his family in search of food, and they ended up in the enemy nation of Moab. And while they were there, shortly after arrived, we don't know how long, but it seemed like it's shortly after they arrived, Elimelech ends up dying. But Naomi still has 2 sons. Her 2 sons marry Moabite women, so they marry outside of the Jewish faith. They marry the Moabites. They had a whole bunch of gods, and so by marrying these 2 women, they were bringing in these false gods into their home rather than just the one true God. But after several years, about 10 years, as we just learned, Naomi's sons also pass away, and so that leaves Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law, and she decides to go back to Bethlehem. And she says to them, you go back to your people. And one of the daughters-in-law, Ruth, which is why we know her name, she said, nope, I'm going with you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And so she basically changes her spiritual beliefs and says, I'm going to follow your God, and I'm going to stick with you. And the God that she chose to follow, that's our God. That's the same God that we follow. So today, as I said, we're going to cover a whole lot of the story today. We're going to cover quite a few verses. But at this point in the story, as we are beginning here, Ruth comes back with Naomi, back to Bethlehem. She doesn't know anyone. I mean, this is a new foreign land to her. And it's all new to her. And so she's going to have to find out a way to make a living so she can take care of herself and Naomi so they will have food to eat. And so our goal today, as we go through this, and I hope you're able to do this today, is we're going to learn to make wise choices. We're going to see how to make wise choices, what we need to do in order to do that on a daily basis, so that God will reward us eventually. Now, He always rewards people for their faithfulness. It might be immediately, it might be a little bit later down the road, it might not even be until the next life. But God always does reward our faithfulness. That's one thing that you can count on. But at this point in the story, with Ruth and Naomi, life is pretty ordinary. It's pretty mundane. They've experienced grief. They've gone through a difficult time. And now they come back to Bethlehem after being gone for a long time. And as I said, it's new for Ruth. They go back there. They have to find something that they can do, because it's just the 2 of them, in order to put food on the table. So they're facing some challenges. They made some choices. They did some things that we can do in our life that will help us make smart decisions, help us to rely on God more throughout our life. And we get to decide the kind of life that we live. Okay, that's up to us. We get to decide that. So there's some things that we need to do, some decisions we need to make. And the first one on your listening guide is be faithful where you are. Wherever God puts you, you be faithful right there. And so Ruth and Naomi, what they're doing is they're trying to return to some type of normalcy in their life. And they're still in mourning over their husband. I think that's probably something that they would be doing. And their lives are different, and it's challenging. They're undoubtedly sad, maybe a little nervous, a little apprehensive about what's going to happen. And they're entering into this new life together in relative poverty. And they're facing really bad odds at being successful, of ever having a thriving life again. They're just going to barely get by. So they're hurting, but they keep on going. They keep on pushing forward. They arrive back home, and by no coincidence, it's at the beginning of the barley harvest, and some people think that would be around this time of year, around mid-April, that they arrived back there. Let's go ahead and read the first 3 verses in Luke chapter 2. It says, "Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, 'Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it.' Naomi replied, 'All right, my daughter, go ahead.' So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech." Now back then they had a law that was put in place by God. It's in Leviticus during the time of Moses, and what it was is it was an assistance program for those people who were willing to work. And so what they could do is they could go out into a field that was being harvested, and they were doing everything by hand. Okay, they couldn't plant 900 acres of corn in a week. Okay, this is everything by hand. And so they could go out, and as they're harvesting the barley or whatever the grain happens to be, they could follow behind the harvesters and pick up whatever fell out or whatever was behind them. And so back then, the owners, the farmers, they didn't go through a field twice. They just went through once. Whatever was left behind was there for the poor or the foreigners, so they could pick it up and have something to eat. And it was a way of assisting them. And God, He instituted this in Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10, says, "When you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. In the same way, it's the same way with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grapes from the vines, and do not pick up the grapes that fall to the ground. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you." And then He reminds them, "I am the Lord your God." And so this is what Ruth was taking advantage of. She was a hard worker. And the Bible tells us that she would go out, she would work all day long. And she'd only take a little short break sometime during the day, but she was a hard worker. Naomi was too old to do this. So Ruth went out, and it's called gleaning is what they did. They went out and they gleaned daily. She did. And it's not easy to always plod along through the daily grind. And that's just what happens day after day after day. And so Ruth, she's beginning to go through, and she's picking up all the leftovers, all the stuff that the people had dropped. And there was no sign that said Ruth gleaned over here, with an arrow pointing towards it. It was just wherever you could find. And so Ruth, as it would happen, comes upon the field of Boaz. She does not know at the time who Boaz is, or that he owns it, but she starts to go through the field. And if you know the rest of the story, and if you read Ruth like you're supposed to a couple weeks ago, then you would understand we're beginning to see God's hand at work in the story here. Verses 4 through 5 of Ruth 2. "While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. 'The Lord be with you,' he said. 'The Lord bless you,' the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, 'Who's that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?' So he sees all these people in the field. They're harvesting the grain. There's some there that are picking up the leftovers. And no sooner does he walk away that he grabs one of his workers and says, 'Who's that? Who's that over there?' Now, it doesn't say this, but I'm assuming maybe she had some type of beauty or just something about her presence that really stood out, that really caught his eye. But here's what you need to understand. When he learns who she is, he makes it clear to her. He goes up and has a conversation with her, and he makes it clear to her that he has heard all of the good that she has done for his relative, Naomi. He thanks her. He commends her for moving back to Bethlehem with Naomi and for being with her during her time of loss and her time of grief. And then he says, "Don't glean anywhere else, Ruth. Okay, I will protect you if you stay here. I will take care of you." And then he pulls the staff aside, and you know what he says to them? Remember what he says as you read Ruth? He said, leave some extra for her. Okay, if she's following behind you, just drop a little bit extra. Just leave a little extra for her. In other words, he's being generous to her. Now, why would he say that? It's not because of her beauty, but it was because of how she had treated his relative, Naomi, of her faithfulness to Naomi. Now he wants to be gracious to her. He wants to help her out. When you think about it, it would have been easy for Ruth and Naomi to blame God for their situation. I mean, they moved to a foreign land and God takes half her family away. It would have made sense for them to try to find any kinds of means to make money or to take a woe is me attitude. But they didn't do that. They are faithful in the small things, that whatever it was they had left, they were faithful in those things. God takes notice. God places them near the field of Boaz, causing her to catch the eye of Boaz and using his generosity to help these two widows survive. So we need to be faithful wherever we are. Wherever God puts you, you be faithful. Don't turn your back on him. Rely on him, but be faithful in that area. And that goes right into lesson number 2. The choice that we can make, the decision that we can make. Look for God in the ordinary. Look for God in the ordinary. Look at verses 19 and 20. Where did you gather all this grain today? Naomi asked. Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you. So Ruth told her mother-in-law about a man in the field who she had worked. And then she said, the man I worked with today is named Boaz. May the Lord bless him, Naomi told her daughter-in-law. He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. I want to circle that phrase there, family redeemers, because that's going to be important here in just a little bit. Naomi's thrilled because of the field that Ruth had stumbled into. But what's going on here? Okay, what's actually happening here? This is really important. This is really important to the story, so don't zone out for the next couple minutes, okay? After the next couple minutes, and you can zone out again if you want to, but catch this. In the land of Israel, there was a law called the law of the kinsman redeemer, or the guardian redeemer, or as the New Living Translation says, the family redeemer. You can read about it in Deuteronomy 25 or Leviticus chapter 25. But what it said, and this sounds weird to us in our culture, but what it said was if a man were to die and he did not have any kids, because of his loss of income to the family, they might lose their property, they might lose their estate, and lose their livelihood. And that's what happened to Elimelech and Naomi here. So Elimelech died, his 2 sons died, and now Naomi and Ruth, they returned back to where their land was, back to their homeland. So in this case, a relative could go in and could buy this land from whoever happened to be holding it at the time, and he could redeem it. He could be a guardian redeemer or a family redeemer because God really wanted to keep that land within the family, because that's how it was all split up between all of the tribes. But not only did he have to buy the property, he also had to marry the deceased brothers or relatives, uncles, whoever it happened to be, wife who had no kids, and have kids with that person so that the family could continue. In other words, within the family, that situation was going to be redeemed. It was going to be taken care of. And God was making sure of that. And so the property was going to be redeemed, and the woman, the family, was going to be redeemed. Now, it would be very easy to miss God's hand in this story that's working behind the scenes, because everything seems ordinary. She's just going out to work, just trying to survive. Naomi, she recognizes the generosity of Boaz, that this is more than just luck. Okay, this is more than just luck. God had a hand in this. God's working. And so, Again, at this point in the story, Ruth and Naomi's life is very normal. Okay? It's predictable. It's predictable. And so Ruth, she's going out, gleaning every day, trying to pick up the leftovers to take care of her and Naomi. But they realize, even though it's ordinary, even though it's mundane, God's hand is in this, and they're going to remain faithful. Ruth ends up in the field of a kind, generous man who just happens to be a family redeemer. She did not plan it that way. So Ruth and Naomi, they don't have very much. Ruth keeps on gleaning, keep on working every day, and this just takes place day after day. You gotta appreciate the routine here, because you know what it's like. You know what it's like. After a while, that monotony, that routine can just begin to wear on you. You get up, you get the kids dressed for school or to go to church, you change the diapers, you make supper, you make the lunch, you get up early, you go to work, you work hard all day, you come home and you start the process all over again. You just do the same thing. And after a while, it can beat you down. It can really wear you down. That monotony just wears you down. But Paul says in Colossians 3, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. Now we know it's the glitz and the glamour that makes the headlines. That's what goes viral. That's what everybody knows about. But most of our lives, pretty ordinary, isn't it? Nothing fancy about it. And that's not a bad thing. Because God works in the ordinary and He works through the ordinary. And it would have been easy for Ruth and Naomi to say, you know what, after everything we've gone through and what we've tried to do, we deserve some generosity. You know, we've got this coming to us. But they just keep faithful in the ordinary. They realize that God's hand is working there, and this is no accident. What's happening is God is painting this picture behind the scenes, without them being totally aware of it, and He's going to bring glory and goodness out of the ashes and the grief of their life. So, look for God in the ordinary. Look for Him in the ordinary. If He does something big and spectacular, wow, that's God. No, we know that. Look for Him in the ordinary, mundane routine of life. And then here's the third choice. We can make third decision. This might be the hardest one. Be patient while God works. Be patient while God works out His will. Some time passes, and according to the time of the harvest, it's about maybe 2 months. People think that Ruth is out there gleaning, doing things and working. And Naomi, she realizes that it's the end of the harvest. The harvest is starting to be stockpiled. It's being prepared. And so Naomi says this to Ruth. Now we're in chapter 3. She says this, chapter 3, verses 2 through 5. Boaz is a close relative of ours. And he's been very kind by letting you gather with the young women. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath, put on perfume, and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor, and don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do. I will do everything that you say, Ruth replied. Now again, this might sound weird to us because of the cultural thing, but Boaz, he's not aware of what's taking place or going on in Naomi's mind here. But at the end of the harvest, what would happen is the farmer, the owner, they would take all their grain, they put it on this large threshing floor. They take this grain that they harvested, throw it up in the air, let the wind blow the chaff and all the unusable things away, and then the grain that would fall back down to the ground, that's what they would keep. The good stuff would come back down. And so it was common during this time, it lasted about a week or so, they say, to the farmer, the owner, some of his workers, they would sleep with the grain. They would stay there so that nobody would come in and steal it. Sure enough, that's what Boaz is doing. That's what's going on here. And so Ruth, she follows Naomi's instructions. Boaz lays down, and he goes to sleep. Look at verses 7 and 9. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking, and he was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. I would say so. Who are you? He asked. I'm your servant Ruth, she replied. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. So basically what's going on here is she is proposing to him. Okay, now put yourself in Boaz's sandals here. Imagine being awakened in the middle of the night, being proposed to by a young, beautiful widow. And basically what she is saying here is, will you redeem me? Will you redeem my family? Will you buy the property and will you marry me? Now it's important to note here, she's not doing anything immoral. Okay, and Boaz is not doing anything immoral. We don't know how many people were sleeping around there on the threshing floor, but although Ruth and Boaz, they were in a potentially unrighteous situation, they remained righteous during this time. And Boaz even acknowledges Ruth's character here, which we'll see in a second. Verses 10 through 12. The Lord bless you, my daughter, Boaz exclaimed. Now he's older than she is. That's why he refers to her as daughter throughout all of this. You're showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now, don't worry about a thing, my daughter, because I will do what is necessary. In other words, he's saying, I accept your proposal. For everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman. But while it's true that I am one of your family redeemers, watch this, there's another man who's more closely related to you than I am. I didn't see that coming. Okay, and all of a sudden there's another guy who's in line here who has the right to marry her and buy the land before Boaz does. And this other guy doesn't even know the situation. He doesn't even know what's going on here, and we don't even know if he's interested at this time. Evidently, Boaz was a nephew of Elimelech's, of Elimelech. Elimelech has another relative who has a right of first refusal, as you might say. So Boaz says, okay, stay where you are until early in the morning while it's still dark. Don't tell anybody, but you can leave, right before it gets light out. And then he said, I will go and approach this other family redeemer. And I will let him know the situation, and we'll see what happens. Now, if you doubt whether Boaz really loves Ruth at this point or not, look at what happens right before she leaves. Verse 15. And Boaz said to her, bring your cloak and spread it out. He measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak and placed it on her back. Then he returned to the town. So he didn't want Ruth to go back to Naomi empty-handed. And just as a side note, whenever you start sending gifts to your potential mother-in-law, that shows that you're in love. Okay, that shows you're serious. And that is what is happening here. Now put yourself in Naomi's shoes. Back at the house, she has no idea what's going on. Okay, there were no cell phones. She couldn't get an update. There's no Facebook where she could go look and see a Facebook post saying, hey, having a great time, over here at the threshing floor. Or there wasn't any Instagram selfie of Ruth and Boaz. She didn't know what was going on. And so she had to be thinking, okay, is this good news that she hasn't come back yet? Is she safe? Has she been insulted? Is she laying in a field somewhere? But early in the morning, Ruth comes back, walks in the door with a cloak full of grain and a big smile on her face. Verse 18. Then Naomi said to her, just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he has settled things today. Does anybody like to wait? Waiting's not any fun, is it? We don't like to wait. Fortunately for her, she did not have to wait very long because Boaz wastes no time. You can read about the whole encounter here if you want to in Ruth. But what he does, he goes to the relative, he confronts the relatives or lets the relative know what's going on, calls all the town elders together, has a meeting with them so he has witnesses so everybody knows what's going on. And the other relative, he begins to think, hey, this could be pretty financially, a good deal for me to do this and to have this land. But then he learned that Ruth is part of the deal. He learned that he's going to have to marry Ruth. Verses 5 and 6, chapter 4. Then Boaz told him, of course you purchased the land your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family. Then I can't redeem it, the family redeemer replied, because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land, I cannot do it. And so Boaz sits there and tries to keep this blank stare, this smile off of his face, even though this is exactly what he was wanting to hear. This is how he was hoping it would work out. So Boaz firms up the details of the contract, in the presence of the elders, and he dances all the way back to Naomi and Ruth's house. Next week, we'll finish this series up next week, but next week we're going to learn some very important implications that come out of Ruth's and Boaz's marriage. And let me just say, their marriage changes everything for us. Changes things for you, changes things for me. And I'll give you a hint. This is a foreshadowing of Jesus. Okay, this is a foreshadowing of Jesus here. We're going to stop right there. Kind of an abrupt end, but we're going to stop right there because next week we'll really get into what it means to us. And it's good. There's a reason Ruth is in the Bible. It's a good story. And I won't say anymore. This moment we're going to have a time of communion. We're going to have a time of communion, and we know what it is. We know what it stands for. We know what it means, but I think because of the routine, because of us doing it all the time, we can lose some of that specialness that it should have. And so don't do that. As you take the communion now, really think about what it means. Think about what went into it that made it possible for us to have a relationship with God, to belong to His family, to be part of God's family. Right? Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for this story of Ruth. We love to see the faithfulness that is demonstrated in this story. That just throughout the everyday routine of life, that they remained faithful to you. And even though they were unaware, you were working behind the scenes. So please help us to remember that you work the same way in our life. Help us to be faithful in the small things. Help us to be faithful in the ordinary. And to allow you to work out your will. God, we are so grateful that we have Jesus in our life. We're grateful for His death and burial and resurrection. And as we remember it each week by taking communion, just help us to take it in remembrance of Jesus and His sacrifice. Do not take this lightly. Thank you again for your love, your mercy, and the grace that we don't deserve. It's in your name we pray. Amen.